All right, I found my board. Put my vault down here. All right, there have been some headlines recently about driverless taxis in San Francisco, and the company that's in those headlines is Cruise. We are now going to dive into Cruise a little bit and talk a little bit about what happened and how you can respond when there's crisis in your business. So first, let's go a little history so you get a little backdrop here. Cruise was founded in San Francisco by these two guys. Back in October of 2013, they went through a thing called Y Combinator, which is an accelerator incubator in San Francisco that you have to apply to get into. And they had a vision for driverless cars that would be fuel efficient and also run all day, different kind of cost structure, and providing services to America without drivers, which is basically labor replacement. And using smart strategy and smart GPS to determine optimal routes. So hopefully you've got benefits and things happening on time with well-timed taxi drives and all that. That was the theory. So Kyle and Dan, right here behind me, Kyle being from MIT, the CEO and founder, and Dan, who is sort of a chief product officer, they went out and did it after meeting in college. They were working internships and at Justin TV, which would become Twitch. So they get some money together and they start off with Cruise. Well, the first thing you have with these, and on my case studies, I like to dive into this a little bit and take you on a journey. First, let's take a look at the money. After being founded in October 2013 at Y Combinator, they get a California permit to test driverless cars right around in 2015. Then they would be acquired by GM in March of 2016. Wow, this company, young but good enough for California to give them a permit to do testing on driverless cars. GM sees the future and they're like, hang on, I think we'd like to be part of this, and they actually bought the company. I've heard 500 million, I've heard $1 billion. Regardless, it was a real number and it wasn't a distress sale, and GM was trying to get in before things got really heated up and before the value went up. So away they go. Now, the early investment up to the GM acquisition looked like this. They had about 4.3 million in seed, because when you say, hey, we're a Y Combinator graduate, that's a highly credible thing. And away they go, and they score 4.3 million at that time, March 2014. A little over a year and a half later, they did a Series A, 12.5. Now that's real money there. Then GM came in with the acquisition shortly thereafter, and they put 14 million in. So now they got enough money to do their research and to take that permit to start testing the technology that would eventually become the cars. Remember, that's not a permit to actually be on the road picking you and me up. That's only a permit to do testing in a limited way, and also having a backup human driver in the car in case something goes wrong. But nonetheless, they're building the technology and they're testing it. Well, soon after GM buys them, 2018, 2021, I call this the chapter of go big or go home, because big dollars came in so they could do big research, building technology platform, and they're buying cars, equipment, the hardware that went with it, and developing that hardware. And in May of 2018, they got $2.5 billion from SoftBank's Vision Fund. That is a lot of money. They also got $1.1 billion from GM. So by definition, just with cash in the bank, they're a triple unicorn at this time. And so this is a big deal, thinking this is going to be driverless taxis everywhere. GM owns it. They're going to be selling the cars, the technology. Division of GM. Here we go, off and running. Then October, November, here's what happened. They had $750 million come in from Honda, who also said that we want to put $2 billion in the future because we like this idea for Tokyo and major Japanese cities. We'd like to see it there. And they brought him a new CEO that came from a division of GM, not a surprise there, with these kind of big dollars here. And these guys recently out of college, smart as they were, GM put one of its own folks, as they say, an adult in the room, and Dan Amnan became the CEO. Then, May of 2019, check this out. They announced that they had another $1.15 billion come in at a valuation of $19 billion. So this thing's almost worth $20 billion. That is very big and very real money. Then, January 21, Microsoft and Honda. Remember, Honda said that they would put more in the future? There's the future. January 21, joining Microsoft, kicking the valuation from just within 2 years going another 50% from 19 billion to 30 billion. So now you have a $30 billion company with expectations as high as the valuation. Takes us to 2022, the year of deployment. So here they go. February of 22, they say, hey, we're open to the public, whatever that meant. March of 22, GM went and they acquired SoftBank's equity and they invested 1.35 billion more. So now SoftBank is out and GM is buying one of the early big investors out so that they could have more ownership unto themselves. Then in June, California moves the permit up to deploy, permit to test with all the technology they were doing, permit to test. Again, no real drivers, no real routes, no real passengers. You have to have your own driver in there, all those things on test. Now they move it up to deploy driverless vehicles. No sooner than they get the permit to deploy, then they have to recall the 80 vehicles and completely change the software apparently because they had a crash. So that's bad. Then in August, San Francisco petitioned back to the state of California that said, hey, we're the city where these things are testing. You're giving them a permit and these things are going to be in our city. And we don't think that this cake is completely cooked yet. And we protest this. And so San Francisco was objecting to what was happening with Cruise having a permit to actually deploy because the state of California and Sacramento gave them the permit, but Cruise was based in San Francisco and city of San Francisco, police, fire, and city hall were like, hey, we don't think this is ready. We're seeing things. We're watching them. We think this permit is premature to actually being able to deploy. That was 2022. So you can see, the year starts with fanfare, but it ends with question marks and a recall in between. Nonetheless, by September, San Francisco's got a fleet of 100 driverless cruises out there. Then, the vision forward in competition. They had also announced that they were going to have driverless taxis coming to Japan. They announced that they would be testing in Austin, Dallas, Houston, and Miami. They said Uber and Lyft, they said, hey, we're going to be the play here because Uber and Lyft have actually abandoned self-driving development. In other words, they're operating Uber and Lyft as you and I know it today, and maybe someday they would use self-driving vehicles that they would, purvey from maybe someone like Cruise under a contract. But Uber and Lyft said, we're not spending the money on self-driving development. That's a large technology investment. We're not doing that. Keep also in mind that Uber and Lyft are public, trying to turn a profit. So we're turning a profit doing this, and it's been tough for them to do. If you know the history of Uber and Lyft, profits have not come easy. So while you're trying to generate a profit and positive PE on Wall Street and then say that you're investing billions in self-driving development, no. So both Uber and Lyft said they weren't doing it. So most people thought that was a good thing. Hey, Cruise and Waymo, which is owned by Google or Alphabet, maybe that clears the way for them to be the self-driving leaders. As I said, Waymo. Then they showed this. This is a city taxi for Tokyo. Kind of cool. The sides open up and up to 4 people or 6 people, depending on the configuration, can fit in there. So nonetheless, the Cruise technology, you've got, saying in Japan that these very interesting, city vehicles, and if you've been to Tokyo, it's very technologically advanced, really neat things going on all the time. And that taxi there would fit in Tokyo perfectly, and they said it's coming in 2026. So with the issues that we're having trying to do test and deployment, they were still out there talking about vision and everything they're doing for the future. Then, this year happened. Here's what happened. Summer drama in San Francisco. First, 10 Cruise vehicles stopped functioning in the middle of a busy street. And apparently all of their software became confused and they locked down the street, and there was more than one vehicle. Do I go? Do I not go? Do I go? And the police are like, what the hell do we do here? These unmanned robot cars are stuck. So that wasn't good. Happened in North Beach. Then a few days later, a Cruise vehicle drove right into a construction zone and got stuck in wet concrete. This is like a comedy movie or a cartoon, where people go running, they get stuck in the concrete and they can't move. Well, guess what? That really happened. It drove right into a construction zone. These guys are diving for cover, and the Cruise suddenly was stuck in wet concrete. Yeah, pretty embarrassing. Then it got really bad. So you may think that this is kind of comical, and a degree it is, until you think, what happens if there's a person that's there? Well, it did happen. Fortunately, it wasn't a fatality, but this is what happened. There is a vehicle, that was stopped, and apparently the cruise taxi stopped for some incident, but then it thought it needed to move out of traffic, and it hit a woman and dragged her 20 feet on the ground. They got the vehicle to stop. Some people that were there stood in front of the vehicle, and apparently it sensed it and it stopped. And they got the fire department out there that had to use all this equipment to lift this thing up and extract this woman from beneath the vehicle. Well, fortunately, she didn't die, but unfortunately, she's in the hospital with extremely serious injuries. And then the city of San Francisco is like to Sacramento, I told you, we got them stuck in wet concrete, we got them stopping on city streets, and now somebody's been hit. And so, big issues. So guess what? They announced they had to suspend operation. But a closer look wasn't good. I'm going to read this to you, and what I have on screen here comes from a news story. The California Department of Motor Vehicles suspended the permits to deploy driverless vehicles. So California heard San Francisco and they pulled the permit. Now crews can't operate. They have no license to operate. Then they blamed the suspension on the employees of the San Francisco-based firm Cruise because they said you were hiding the full story behind the crash that left the pedestrian injured. So apparently, the state of California was asking for information about what happened in San Francisco. Police and fire had photographs. A lot of things happened at the scene, and they were witnesses to what they encountered when they got there, and this woman is trapped under the Cruise taxi. Well, apparently, the company did not cooperate fully with Sacramento, and the state was upset about that and said, you didn't tell us the whole story about the software, the glitch, whatever happened. And we're blaming the suspension on you because not only did your software glitch, not only did you have a problem, not only did someone get hurt, you didn't freaking cooperate with me. And driverless cars represent a risk unless your software is fully tested and is proving that you are mitigating the risk. Well, they also announced that any further deployment, they're going to have a human in the car. Wait a minute, this is a driverless taxi. If you take a taxi and put a person in it, isn't that an old school taxi? So you've sort of completely defeated the notion of driverless taxis with advanced software that always go on the right route and have lower costs for everybody because you don't have to pay a human. Well, if you're going to be forced to put a human in there for safety reasons, you no longer have a driverless company, you have an old school taxi. And away we go. So, but despite what's going on, GM says they're still confident that they'll get the software right, but this has been pulled back. They also pulled back in Austin and Dallas and Miami where they were doing some testing there under permits. They have suspended all those operations on a national basis, the assumption being that they're working on their software and working on the things that have caused these glitches and problems. But General Motors said in Q3 of last year, 1 year ago, they believe this is ultimately going to be a product that works for them, but they had lost more than $5 billion since 2018 on research and development. Then just this year, they said that they've lost almost $2 billion just in the first 3 quarters of this year, but nonetheless, it says we think this will be a $50 billion revenue producing division by the end of the decade. Roughly 7 years. That's a big deal. So that's what GM thinks. So GM still thinks it's out there. But there's some lessons in here for you and me. And so within the story of Cruise, are we going to have driverless taxis? I think so. Are they going to take a big pause here and they go back to the software and the learnings? I think so. Because they're not the first product to go out there and have glitches. Now, their glitches could be someone gets hit or a terrible accident happens. But products have glitches all the time. They get it right, have a little PR issue, and then they get off and running to the future. But for you and me, let's talk about this. Failing publicly requires candor, not denial. So regardless of what company you have, if you have something that has a failure or a problem and it impacts the public, maybe you're a restaurant and you have a little food poisoning issue and you had bad oysters you thought you had a good supplier. Look, you only have one chance to win those customers, and you have to have candor, not denial. You don't have to tell every little bit of the whole story and all the background of it, but you do have to have candor and not be denying it. You don't deny something's happened. You say, something has happened here. One of our food suppliers had an issue. We're going through everything. We're throwing everything out. We're testing the kitchen. We're going through doing all these things. That's candor. That's candor. Oh, I don't know if he really got sick here. We're going to look into it. No, that's spin. It can be an opportunity to make it right, and people say, hey, what happened there, I really liked it. When Chipotle had the food poisoning, they did it the wrong way. They didn't really indicate what ex-employees were saying, that they thought kitchen procedures and sanitation was the problem. Chipotle was blaming other things. Unfortunately, it really was Chipotle's kitchen that wasn't operating at the standards so that you and I could depend on getting one of those Chipotle burritos or bowls in such a way that it was safe to eat, and we wouldn't get 2-day food poisoning, which really is terrible. So, crisis communication 101. Be transparent with the authorities. So this is if you've got a product issue and there's something in the news. But if it's the authorities coming to visit you and people show up, you need to be transparent with the authorities, bring them into your conference room, and be clear and open with the media that's covering that. These are the things that are a lesson for you and me. It's be upfront and be smart. And there's great PR firms out there that will help you with crisis communication so you can do all these things so that the consumers, the media, and any authorities all feel that you've handled this in the right way. Even if you're at fault and you have to pay a fine or you have to go through some things, always do it that way. By the way, you can turn this internal. If you have an issue inside your company or a problem inside your company, dealing with candor, being transparent, and being upfront with people before they're putting it out on Glassdoor, because that becomes the media against your company. Glassdoor is like each person in your company becomes a reporter, and Glassdoor becomes the media. So the lessons for you and me: candor, transparency, gather your facts, and be clear about what you're doing is always the best policy. And Cruise needed a little bit more of that in San Francisco when this driverless taxi that they're putting in place, which looks like it's going to be a really interesting product, went from getting stuck in cement to blocking streets to actually hitting somebody. They could have done it better.